is Ernie Bighorn Jr. I live on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. I'm an enrolled member of the Sioux tribe. My family's been ranching and farming for almost 100 years. I live on a place called Box Elder, or Bighorn Ranch. My grandfather ran bulls and cattle for the Fry Fruit Company in the 20s and 30s. And my uncles were all kind of ranchers and farmers as well. And they all struggled from one time to another, but I guess we just never really made a good living at it, so much as just surviving at the time. And during those years, in the 20s and 30s and 40s, the government did supply various Indians with some livestock and some land. My dads and my uncles all received allotments. Allotments means that the Indian people at that time, enrolled members, received a 320 and also an 80-acre piece of ground. That ground, those allotments basically, even though that the land is assigned to each individual, it still was held in trust, which means if it's held in trust that they really didn't own it, but they could use it as they thought they needed. A lot of them built home sites on it. But when the first allotment came out, Indian people sold a lot of their land to non-Indians. So we lost a lot of Indian land through that process. So when I grew up, we probably had maybe half of our reservation was tribal or allotted Indian land. The rest of it, probably a little less than half, probably was non-Indian, and that's the way it is today. That means white people here on the reservation have land that were given to them during the 30s and so forth, so they inherited some land. Now those, the criteria there basically unknown to us was that our land that we had in trust couldn't be used for collateral, to buy land or to purchase things and whatever, but the non-Indian could do that. And so when in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, the banks such as Trader State Bank, Popular Bank, Indian Bank, or banks on Indian reservation, they basically were, the bank officers consisted of people who owned these lands. And so they became pretty much well off, as you build that for a while. So that's kind of a little bit of the history of the land base, because it's an economic thing, and we never looked at it as being as an economic thing. We just survived. That's what it was. I think the Indian people and the white people have two concepts of what economics is. What's the value of each one. We don't really quite understand it as of today. And that's the value in which we grew up in that. So at one time that the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Department of Interior at one time, probably in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s type things, before the Civil Rights Act came about, is that the Bureau did have monies for Indians to apply for loans and for grants for economic development, such as cattle and land and stuff like that. But when the Civil Rights Act came about, somehow that the Bureau Interior turned that over, giving loans and stuff to Indians was given over to the Department of Interior, or to the Interior, or to USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture. In this case, they gave it to the FSA, Farm Service Administration. They administered a loan program called a disadvantage program for Native Americans who couldn't make it. Okay, so, and that was probably in the 60s and the 70s, thereabouts. That's when I first got into that business. Like I say, my dad and my mother had cattle, and they passed on. And so they left it up to me as the oldest son to kind of take over the ranching business, so to speak. I reluctantly did. I knew there wasn't any money in it, but I went to school, got a master's degree, and was a teacher and so forth. And so I had a job that supplemented, the cattle business, so to speak. But in the cattle business, you have to have a range unit. You have to have a unit in which you can run your cattle. If you don't have a range unit or land to run your cattle, then you really can't have cattle. That's kind of the way it is. And so I struggled in getting that in a full successful operation. And so I applied probably maybe 30 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, knowing that the FSA had that disadvantaged loan program. There was the program basically tells the individual that the government, USDA, Farm Service Administration, could give you a loan for operation and capital investment. Certain criteria. Of course, you have to have land, you have to have cash flow, you have to have land, but you have to have criteria. And we always had to piece it together depending on what the tribe had available for range units and for rules that said how many cows you could have. They had rules. But it always come down to the financing of paying for that unit. It costs you to do that. And you also have, there's three different kinds of land. You have tribal land, and you have allotted land, and you have non-Indian land. Three types of land that you have. And those lands determine what the value of whomever is running a business. So the Indian people couldn't use or can't use allotted land or tribal land for collateral, but the white man could. So they could apply for like BLM land. They can do that today. That's part of the history. So there's one unit here on this reservation where a non-Indian leases that land under the BLM price, not cheaper than the Indian price. So he can outbid us all the time. But that's the way the rules are. That in itself is still a problem. But let me get back to the lawsuit. What happened, and I'll explain what happened to me as an individual that led up to help in the lawsuit. There was one time, the process basically is that if you needed a loan to pay for your range unit and buy cattle and so forth, you could fill out this application. This case, I'd had some cattle, but I needed some help with paid for my leases and operation costs. And so I go to the Culberson office, which is the FSA office, and fill out an application for this. And probably I would do this in November and December of each year. And so I'd fill out an application, and I did this over a number of years. And what I would do is I'd go fill out the application, and then the application would ask you to do certain things. And so what the loan officer would do is he'd give me the application. I'd fill it out, take it back, and say, well, looks okay, but we need you to do this. We don't see a cash flow yet, and so come back next month. Or 2 weeks we'll do again. So I do that again, and then he comes back, well, he says, you don't have this on there, so do this and do that. So I do this maybe 5 or 6 times. So here comes May, when it's time to to run your catalog, and nothing's paid. And so you go to the loan officer, and he says, well, it looks like everything's complete now. Unfortunately, we don't have no more money. Okay, this happened over several different years. And I run into a lady that worked for the Carnegie Foundation, I believe she did. And they were doing some studies on problems like I was having on getting finance with FSA. So they kind of assigned her to me to follow this process out through a whole year. And so what I would do is I'd go to the FSA office. She would be there, and we fill out the application, go through. We documented everything. For 5 years we did that. And finally at one time, the part of the process is that in an FSA loan is that you make an application. If it's denied, you can appeal it, and go. You had a process to do that. Okay, so one of the meetings that I was told that, before the meeting I was told I was going to get this loan anyway, no matter what I did. So I called a meeting, and the lawyer was there, and we had the meeting, and during the meeting there was the regional officer and the officers and my lawyer and different people were there. And so we stopped the meeting in the middle of the meeting and said, I want to file a lawsuit against that man sitting right over there. That was the loan officer for discrimination. So we filed there, and then matter of a couple of weeks, they gave me a loan for $150,000 or $200,000, which I needed at that time. Okay, so that was just the beginning of what was going on. And so there were other individuals that were doing the same thing too. And so at that time, then we called in we called a meeting, and there was a lady by the name of Clarice Mandan from South Dakota, and other people that kind of gathered together, so we need to do something. So we contacted a lawyer in Washington that was worked with the black lawsuit. He came forward and started putting things together. And so we had several meetings. We had actually more. We had quite a few meetings. At one of those meetings that we were contemplating not only suing the FSA office for discrimination, but also the Bureau of Indian Affairs, because we couldn't use our monies for collateral. It ended up where the people that were there decided that they wouldn't sue the BIA as part of the lawsuit. They would keep that separate. And so that's what it was filed only against the FSA USDA Office for Discrimination. Discrimination based on just the example that I gave you, what they were doing not only to me, but they were doing that to all Indians, And so we filed a suit, and after 12 years of talking, negotiations, and so forth, finally in 2012, the lawsuit was settled. I went back a couple of times to testify under the Civil Rights Department of Justice, and my case was going to be one of the cases that they were presented. We went to court. I had 5 boxes of information, 500 pounds of information that the lawyers have in Washington to go to court on that. So that's how much documentation we had on that. And so the lawsuit and the settlement part of it, I think it was for like 600 and some million. I'm not quite sure the amount. It was, a lot. And of course, the Indian people thought that was a whole bunch, And then, so it ended up where that there was two types of lawsuit that a native could apply for. One of those was for, I think it was for about 50,000. That say you or me could any apply just by saying we went to this office and we were discriminated against, and we just file it, and you would get that 50,000. Okay, and then there was the Part B one, where that one was a larger one. And that was for 250,000 plus debt forgiveness. Okay, but the trick to that, and pay taxes on it. But the trick to that was that you had to hire a lawyer, and you'd have an expert witness to say that this is what you actually had lost. So we had to pay for out of that money. We had to pay out of our stuff the lawyers and the expert witness. That cost maybe 50,000 or 40,000 just for that, you know. And so I don't know how many, maybe a couple, 300 was in for the Part A one, which is the smaller one. Probably 100 or so, 150. I'm not even sure of the total number that resulted from the Part B one. Okay, so that sounds good. Okay, that's, you know, debt forgiveness, 250, you know. But if I had to, and I settled for that, and I thought it was a good deal. But it's 12, how many years later? 20 years, 10 years later? Okay, I went and bought machinery with that. That was worth 15, 20,000, this or that. I pick up, you know, that sort of thing. Okay, so now I got 2 tractors, 2 swathers that are down because they're old and they're depleted and they need repairs. Each one of those is going to cost me 15,000 to repair. Okay, I wasn't thinking like a white man. You know, if I was, I would ask for a new tractor, a new swather, a new baler, you know, everything new, instead of just give me just a little bit, you know. But we didn't think that way. So in the lawsuit, we probably had maybe half of that left over, of that 600 and some thousand. So there might have been 320 or million left. And that was kind of drawing interest and all that sort of stuff. So we had some other lawsuits about trying to get the rest of that, but they wouldn't give it to us. Instead, they created a board that would oversee that the remaining funds. And those remaining funds could be used for nonprofits mostly, and that they could provide some resources to natives who might need them. There was a section on there for colleges could apply for some of that money. So that money still is in operation yet. There's some monies available. Okay, so now I'm back to not having sufficient collateral to buy that new piece of machinery or buy more land, because I can't use my land or trust land for collateral. If I could go to the bank and say I have so many acres and it's worth $2 million or whatever. I want to buy a new this, new that. Then I'll be okay. Or I want to buy land. Then I'm like a white man. Shoot, I'm in business. But it ain't that way. And so if I had the time, I would initiate a lawsuit against the Bureau for not allowing Indians to use their trust land, including tribal land, for collateral like a non-Indian can. What we're hoping now, I think, is that the way that the government would run their business, you know, I think that's part of what I think could be done, is that if Indian people could use what land they've got that is in trust, to use that for collateral, like a non-Indian, that's equal. Otherwise, it's not equal. Right now, white people living on this reservation have an advantage over the non-Indian in this land. They can, tribal rules say that it's opened up for bid. So a white man could pay $26 or $30, $40 an acre for farmland, And Indian said, we can't afford that. And so the tribes can say, well, you've been outbidded, but this is what it's going to cost. But we can't give you that if you are willing to pay that same price. Where are we going to get money to pay that same price? So in my case, I did apply for one of these loans from the money that's left over. There's Akapan, I think in South Dakota. They have a nonprofit. And so I'm able to buy $50,000. They gave me $50,000 out of that Keepseagle money to buy $50,000 worth of cows. That's what I did. Condition, I have to keep 20 of those calves a year for 4 years. Okay, and doing that, that should build up my herd up to 200. Okay, that's the way that it should work. If this works, they're giving me that money to do that. So in essence, I guess that this nonprofit group is giving me that collateral to do that. Okay, I could have maybe bought machinery, but machinery doesn't make you any money. Okay, now if the FSA through the FSA program, USDA and the BIA Interior could back that piece of money that you borrow as the collateral part of that. Of course, you'd have to have a good plan to do that. But it also takes you a mental capacity to have that thought, to think like a non-Indian and think business that way. And so then tribal politics plays in it. And you can only get so much land, and they control part of that too. And so some things need to be cleaned up, some things need to be brushed up. But I think Congress could do that. I'm not sure how that would work out, but I think that's one of the solutions. Is what I'm doing now is giving you some collateral to support what you're doing. Okay, no, but I'm paying almost 10% interest on that right now. Whereas the banks is only like 5.5%. Okay, so Keepseagle people are making some money there. And this Keepseagle program should last maybe 25 years by doing this process.